Hi everyone, welcome to this YouTube channel. My name is Levi Cosijn, and today I am speaking with Anthony Lewis. Hi Anthony, how are you?
Hi Levi, good to see you again.
Great to see you, great to have you back. Today we're going to speculate. We're going to speculate about aspects, and more specifically about Rasi aspects. So we're going to look at some underlying rationale. Rasi aspects are very old from the Vedic astrology angle. They're considered the oldest aspects. They're also mentioned first in the Brihat Parashara Horashastra before the planetary aspects. There's some interesting ideas about which came first. Was it the signs that aspect, or was it specific degrees, and so on.
Okay, so let me preface this by saying several months ago, you and I did a video on Antisha, which are connections between signs that are reflected across the solstitial axis.
Yes.
And you had wondered whether the Rashi aspects of Vedic astrology were somehow related to this idea of reflection across the solstices. You got me thinking. So I've been thinking about this now for a few months. And I think I've come up with some connections that might explain it. But this, as you said, is very speculative.
What is interesting before you go on is mentioning that, see, Rashi aspects come from the Jaimini Sutras, right? Jaimini Upadesa Sutras, which is a coded Sanskrit text, very important, also translated by Ernst Wilhelm. And it's one of the first things we encountered there is the sutra on the Rashi aspects. Okay, so it's very short. It's, if you translate in English, is in front are seeing the Rashis and at the side Rashi both. Okay, this is the sutra where everybody agrees upon,
right?
Which is highly peculiar, I would say, because these sutras are, all of these sutras are actually impossible to decode, so to speak,
except this one.
Yeah, and so everybody takes this one for granted, and so it's very interesting. Of course, there's an old text which is called the Vrida Karakas, right? Which is, I don't think there's any copies left. I don't know of anybody who has these copies. And I know Ernst Wilhelm doesn't know anyone either. But there should be some parts, pieces left of these old, Vrida means old, right? It's Sanskrit, Vrida is old, texts. And they should have mentioned the Rashi aspects. And so we have, of course, the Rashi chart, the square chart, pointing to that. So I see Rashi aspects work very well in practice. I'm much more inclined using the Rashi aspects than planetary aspects. I use them, but I just, for some reason, I think they're more effective. Of course, it depends on what techniques you use. Like Ken Rao is heavily in planetary aspects, so using the three special aspects of Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter, right? Which is, and also I use it. In fact, I should say I use it extensively because I use Lagitadia Vastas, which are based on natural friendships, but we use planetary aspects. So I should, correct there. But in terms of, looking at transits, I use the Ptolemaic aspects like the trines and the squares and so on, and the sextiles. And also in terms of prediction, I think Rashi aspects, so which the name says it, right? The signs aspect each other. And so whatever contains the sign is also part of that. So when, for example, during this solar eclipse, we're going to have Saturn is in Scorpio, exactly Rashi aspecting the solar eclipse. And so that will have an impact. So it will have a strong Martian influence. Mars from its own sign would then be, from doing it from a good dignity. So giving some fire, some will to execute whatever is necessary in that particular, configuration. And so I'm very curious about the overlap and what ideas you came up with connecting the Rashi aspects from the traditional Vedic angle to these Hellenistic ideas.
So I prepared some slides. Let's go there. And in terms of what you just said, the original Hellenistic idea, as I understand it, is that aspects were between signs rather than planets. So they did use sign-based aspects as their primary aspect doctrine. As you can see, it's like I got a lot of stuff in it, but I'll explain all of what I mean. So the Rashi aspects, musical intervals, I put that there because in Western astrology, the theories of the Pythagoreans about numbers and ratios of numbers and musical intervals is really fundamental to the idea of aspects.
Yes.
which you'll probably understand better than I do as a musician. Aversion, we'll talk about. Those are signs that are adjacent, cannot aspect each other. And that's fundamental to Rasi aspects as well.
Yes.
Like and girding signs simply mean signs that have the same planetary ruler, have a sympathy or connection.
Yes.
And that's similar with Rasi aspects. Antitia are reflections across the solstitial axis, contrantitia, reflections across the equinoxial axis, and those have a connection to Rasi aspects. And the Thema Mundi is a chart that the ancient Hellenistic Greeks used to explain the beginning of the universe and the reason why certain planets got assigned to certain signs. So they use it as a teaching device and not as a fact, a scientific fact. I'm going to go step by step. There'll be a lot of sort of disparate ideas, but they will all connect toward the end, I hope. So this is the chart for today, December 12th. And I put Leo rising. Leo's not rising right now, but I put Leo rising for a reason. And the reason is there is a tradition which, are you familiar with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn? It was a very important mystical society in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Yes.
And out of this society, the Rider-Waite tarot cards developed and reflect the teachings. What's interesting about this society is in defining the meanings of the tarot cards, they use the 36 decans of the horoscope, and they began their zodiac in Leo, in the first decan of Leo, which to me was very interesting because that's unusual. In Hindu astrology, I think you start with Aries as the beginning. And in Western astrology, modern Western, it's also Aries begins the zodiac. In the Thema Mundi, it's Cancer begins the zodiac. But here's a tradition which this Hermetic order said goes back to Egyptian times, based on the teachings of the god Thoth, or however you pronounce that, where everything starts with the first decan of Leo, which is where the star Regulus is, the heart of the lion. That's the beginning of everything. So interesting concept. Here's what the constellation Leo looks like. And his heart is right here. So here's his head, his front chest, and his heart. So everything starts in this decan, according to that system. There are 36 decans, etc. Okay. Regulus is one of the brightest stars in the sky at night. And remember, early astrology was observational. So the astrologers would look at the sky and orient themselves according to these constellations and bright stars. So Regulus would stand out the heart of the lion, and you would know that that's an important direction to orient yourself with if you're looking at the sky. It was also called a royal star. The lion, and particularly the star Regulus, was associated with kings, with rulers. Aversion. So this is an important concept in Hellenistic astrology. Aversion means that two signs cannot really work together because they can't see each other. And there's two ways to be in aversion. You can be next to each other, adjacent. And if you're adjacent, you can't see the sign immediately to your left or your right. They're kind of out of your field of vision. And I say that deliberately because a lot of aspect theory was based on an ancient idea of how the eyes work, of optics, which I'll get to in a minute. And the other two signs you can't see are a sign that would be in a 6th house or 8th house spacing away from where you are. And so these are what we call unfortunate signs, right? The 6th, the 8th, the 12th, and Western puts the 2nd sign in there too. They're unfortunate because if a planet falls in a sign that can't see another sign, then there's no way they can work together. I can't work with you if I can't connect with you in some way. And so there's sort of these rogue planets then that can do what they want and may not work in your interest. Okay. But this principle of aversion is really fundamental also to Rasi aspects. They don't call it aversion, but they say that a sign cannot see the sign immediately next to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's a fundamental Hellenistic idea. And so in Hellenistic astrology, you really want to avoid aversion because planets and signs that are averse or asundatos, asunder, since the signs can't see each other, the planets can't work together, they can't cooperate, and that is not good for the native. And so you really want a way in which the two signs can connect. And if they can't connect by aspect, maybe there's other ways. And the other ways that came up with were the antitia and if the same planet happened to rule both signs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So 3 manners of sympathy. So if there are 2 planets and you want them to work together, they have to be somehow in signs that are sympathetic to each other. And there's 3 ways to do this. One is if there's a major Ptolemaic aspect between the signs, and these major aspects were defined in terms of geometric figures. If they fell on the sides of regular polygons, which are an equilateral triangle, a perfect square, or a perfect hexagon, which would be the sextile, the hexagon, the square, the square, and the triangle, the trine. Or if they were directly across a line 180 degrees, these were the 4 major aspects, and they were significant because they corresponded to these perfect geometrical figures.
Yeah, which can be drawn in a circle, right? That's what you're saying.
Well, yeah, inscribed in a circle, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the other theory about what made aspects major and harmonious, or what connected planets in a way they had some sympathy, was that they formed musical intervals, which I have a slide explain that a little more. Mm-hmm. Signs that are called lichen girding of the same belt basically are signs that are ruled by the same planet, like Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo, Venus, Taurus, and Libra, etc. Mm-hmm. So those 2 signs are sympathetic because they have the same ruler, the same planets in charge of them. And the third way they could be in sympathy, so the planets in them could connect, was if they rose in equal amounts of time, were contranticia, antitia, or were of equal power, they were antitia. Antitia reflect each other across the solstitial axis. They're of equal power because the amounts of sunlight are the same in each. The shadows in each will be the same if you measure them. Mm-hmm. And equal rising simply means that if sign A, let's say Aries rises in an hour and 21 minutes, then the sign across the way, which would be Pisces, would also rise in 1 hour and 21 minutes. So they have in common that the amount of time they take to come over the ascendant is the same. So they have a similarity that gives them a sympathy, and planets in the 2 signs can then work together to help the native. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what's important here, and similar to Rasi aspects, is that Rasi aspects differ from the Graha aspects because the Graha aspects are between 2 planets.
Yes.
And there are specific rules for what aspects, how one planet aspects another. But 2 planets can be in signs where the planets are not an aspect, but where the signs are an aspect.
Yes. And
that gives them another way of working together, just as in the Hellenistic system. Mm-hmm. Okay. Just as a reminder, this is a little diagram of Antitia. This is the solstices in the tropical zodiac, I should emphasize, Cancer to Capricorn. So Cancer reflects on Gemini, Leo reflects on Taurus, etc., Virgo on Aries. And then the contrantitia are reflections across this horizontal line that connects the 2 equinoxes. So Aries reflects on Pisces, Virgo on Libra, etc. They're just reflections, and because the signs have this connection, they have a sympathy, and planets in them can then cooperate. Interestingly, the anticia are, the axes are connected to the cardinal directions on the compass. Cancer is north, Capricorn is south, Aries is east, Libra is west. The theory of elements came after. That theory is made to correspond with these ideas, but it doesn't explain these ideas. The causality is the other direction. The anticia and contranticia are not aspects. They're sympathetic relationships that can act like aspects.
Yeah, but if you have a planet at let's say 4 degrees of Cancer, it will aspect a planet at 26 degrees of Gemini. So you can't.
But that's not considered an aspect.
It's not considered an aspect.
The aspects are one thing, and then these are other ways the signs or planets can connect that are not aspects. That's why they're important. The aspect is defined in terms of the perfect polygons inscribed in the circle. Those are like the purest form.
Right, and it's a matter of terminology in that sense, because I would say an aspect in the sense that these points actually influence each other, right? Which would be the definition of an aspect. But you're using aspect traditionally falling in the category of regular polygons that can be drawn in a circle. Yeah, okay.
The most important way they can relate is through aspect. And then the question is, if there is no aspect, is there another way the planets can relate?
Sure.
Yes, there is.
Yes.
I mean, this is sort of a stupid analogy. It'd be like saying in a monogamous society, if the husband is here and the wife is here, then they have a marriage, right? But if the husband happens to have a mistress, there's a similar relationship with another woman, but she's not his official wife. So the aspects are like the official relationship, and then the others are these subsidiary relationships that are very similar but not the same. This is just to illustrate on the Earth. Here's the sun is shining on the Earth is spinning from left to right. It's tilted with respect to the sun. So in the summer, in the north of the equator, we have the highest point the sun reaches is this Cancer solstice. And then the winter south of the equator, in the winter in the northern hemisphere, the sun corresponds to Capricorn. It's way down here south of the equator. The equinoxes occur at the equator.
Yes.
Okay. Polygons. So this is just going to repeat what I said, but let's go through it. Signs and planets can behold or see each other by being directly opposite each other along the diameter of the circle, or by a sextile, square, or trine based on the sides of a regular or perfect polygon, the hexagram, sextile, the square, and the triangle, the trine, inscribed in the circle of the zodiac. These are the classical or Ptolemaic aspects, similar to the Tajika aspects. The anticia and contranticia are an alternate way that the signs can behold each other, even when they're not an aspect. That's the point here.
All right, okay.
Okay. So it's an alternate way of connecting.
But it's not less powerful.
No. I mean, another analogy might be, if you're following Donald Trump these days, there was an official connection between the State Department and the country of Ukraine, the Ukrainian government.
Yes.
And then Trump sent his lawyer Giuliani to have like an underground connection. So there were two connections, one official and one sort of underground or out of the ordinary. But they both connected Trump with Ukraine. Now, the musical ratios, I think this is really important because much of Hellenistic thinking goes back to the Pythagorean ideas about numbers, the importance of whole numbers and the ratios of whole numbers. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, so I do want to go over it quickly. Signs can see each other because of these aspects, and aspects are related to musical intervals, basically. The musical fifth is a 3-2 ratio. The three sides of a hexagon are equivalent to the two sides of a square. 3 times 60 equals 2 times 90. So we have the hexagon and the square. The musical fourth is a 4-3 ratio. 4 sides of a square, 4 times 90, is equal to 3 sides of an equilateral triangle, 3 times 120. And Pythagoras had this idea of the music of the spheres, that it was actually a harmonious sound in the heaven based on these ratios, and these ratios had to do with how the planets were spaced in their circles around the sun, or the earth, basically, that they thought. And so the aspects fall into these ratios, and if they don't, if there's not a musical ratio connecting two aspects, they're inharmonious, like the 6th house, the 8th house, or adjacent houses do not form a musical ratio. And to continue with this idea, as you mentioned, the Rasi aspects, a planet can see the sign it's looking at and the 2 signs to its sides. Okay, so here are some, this text I adapted from this site, The Physics of Music from the University of Connecticut. So let's go through it. There are different intervals in music, as we know. There's a unison 1-to-1. You play two versions of the same note, corresponds to a conjunction, right?
Right.
If I play 2 middle Cs on 2 pianos, they resonate because they're basically the same note. The octave, it's a 2-to-1 ratio, right? And the octave corresponds to the square in the opposition, right?
Yes.
It's 2-to-1. 2 times 90 is 180. Now, this is important because if you're looking directly at something, it's 180 degrees away from you. So the octave points are going to be 90 degrees from that, what you're looking at. And the point about the octave is that the notes sound the same, they just have different pitches. But you give the same name to the notes. There's middle C, high C. So we're hearing C, but we're hearing it an octave apart. And so if you think about signs, the sign that you're looking directly at will have 2 signs that resonate an octave apart from it, and they're the signs 90 degrees away from it. So those are the signs at the 2 sides, which I think comes into Rasi Aspects, because that's what he's talking about. And if you remember, I said that the ancient theory of optics in Hellenistic astrology was used to explain aspects, because aspect means to look at, right? So one sign aspects another means it can see it, it can look at it. So I think this is an important idea. That the octave is the square to the opposition ratio. The perfect fifth, the 3-to-2, is a sextile to the square ratio. What's to the sides of what you're looking directly at is what's 90 degrees away from it. Has the same name, middle C, high C. These are considered important aspects because they form a musical ratio. The sextile and the square become, in terms of musical theory of aspects, harmonious connections, because you can make music out of them. And I think Pythagoras probably believed that if you could float up into the heavens, you'd be hearing these beautiful sounds when planets or signs got this far apart.
Right.
Okay, so you mentioned, this is from Ernst's book. So he translates this, in front are seeing the Rashis and at the side Rashi, both. And so if you think of this in terms of optical theory or musical theory, in front is 180 degrees in front of you, and the sides are 90 degrees from that on either side. Second strength, this is also from Ernst.
Yes.
You'll see in a minute why I think this is important.
Yes.
He said, if the Lord of the Rashi, Jupiter or Mercury, conjoin or aspect the Rashi, this is a second source of strength. It's an important strength.
Yes.
And Jupiter and Mercury are said to have directional strength in the ascendant, right? So let's keep that in mind, and we'll come back to it.
They're also, they're both moist planets. That's also one of the categories, which is interesting because, moist has that fertility.
So continuing, the Thema Mundi. So now I'm going to tie in the Thema Mundi. In Hellenistic, it's very important. This was explanation of why the planets rule the signs that they do. And it wasn't believed to be a factual, like this, it was just a sort of a theoretical, hypothetical construct. And the idea is at the beginning of the universe, Cancer is rising.
The womb.
Right. And it's a moist sign, so Jupiter and Mercury would be comfortable here. But I think there's another reason.
Yeah.
And the sun, who's the Godhead masculine principle, impregnates the cosmic mother, and they give birth to this baby, which is the universe we live in. Okay. And it's interesting that these two meet right at 0 Leo.
Yes.
Which is the very first decan that the ancient, according to the Golden Dawn, the ancient Egyptians believed began the zodiac. They thought everything began right here, this decanate. In the Thema Mundi, instead of having 0 Leo rising, sometimes it's depicted with the middle of Cancer rising.
Yes.
Okay. And the explanation then is, since these two signs unite to form the universe, gets, the sun impregnates the moon right on this line. So this corresponds to the universe being born. Then the next planet further from the sun, Mercury, rules the next sign and correspondingly gets the sign next to Cancer.
Yes.
And then the next planet would be Venus. Mercury's never more than a sign away from the sun, so that goes here. Venus is never more than 2 signs away from the sun, so it goes here. And then by sort of symmetry gets Taurus as well. Mars is the next sign out, and by symmetry it's going to get Aries. Jupiter's the next sign out. By symmetry it's going to get Pisces. Saturn is the next planet out. It's the furthest one. It's the end of the solar system as we know it. And so it's going to also get Aquarius by analogy, by similarity. The speed and the distance from the sun. Saturn is furthest from the sun. This is the center of the solar system. And this is the very edge of the solar system. Once you get beyond Saturn, you're in God's country.
Right.
Okay. And this is how they explained why the planets rule the signs as they do. So let me continue. Now, one theory about the Thema Mundi is that the Egyptians focused on this time period, Cancer Leo, because it corresponded to the flooding of the Nile. And they could predict the flooding of the Nile by the time that the star Sirius, another very bright star, rose over the eastern horizon. It would sort of disappear in the spring, and then it would reappear right around midsummer, and then the Nile would flood and a whole new cycle of life would begin. Because it was a agrarian society, they needed the flooding of the Nile to fertilize the fields and start plant the crops and go through another year. This period is often called the dog days of summer. Sirius is the dog star. It's a star in the constellation of the dog. And it symbolized a new cycle of life, the beginning of a new cycle of life in ancient Egypt. The dog days, or the canicular days, are generally given as ranging from July 3rd through August 11th. The midpoint of that is the 23rd of July, which is the beginning of tropical Leo. And so I wondered whether tropical Leo, way back when they were developing this theory, where did it look in the sky? That's my question. Now, jumping back to Babylonia, we know the Babylonians recorded celestial phenomena on clay tablets. And among the oldest of these are called the so-called Mulapin tablets.
Yes.
And they've been dated, this one astrophysicist dated them back to the year 1370 BC. So they're pretty old. They're observations from how many, 3 millennia ago? So it occurred to me, since we have the program Stellarium, we can back Stellarium up to that millennium to look at what did the sky look like then. So if I were an ancient astrologer in Egypt or in India, and I were going out at night to look at the sky, what would I see? Okay, and that's what this next slide is.
Mm-hmm.
So here I took Stellarium and backed it up to August 6th of 1500 BC, the middle of, 3 millennia ago, which is about the time that these Mullipen tablets probably were starting to be recorded.
Yeah.
And I don't know when the Vedic stuff was written, whether it was written in this period or earlier or later.
Well, I think Jaimini Sutras, it's probably between 300 and 600 BC.
Okay. So this is
but
like
they don't know, right? I mean, they don't
there's
know.
a millennium before that. So
Could be much earlier. Yeah, it could be much
we
earlier.
were in 1500 BC, and I picked this date because I went out at night and I wanted to put the first decan of Leo right on the midheaven.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's the lion's head. His heart is over here somewhere. And the meridian is right between the constellations, Cancer and Leo. So if
Right.
I'm an ancient astrologer, I go out, whatever time this was at night, I look up to the south and I see due south of me, I look straight up in the sky, I see the lion to my left, the crab to my right.
Mm-hmm.
And this line is right in the middle. And this is the line, according to the Thema Mundi, that the universe was born on.
Mm-hmm.
This is where Leo impregnated Cancer and the universe gets born right here. And if I look to the horizon, on my western horizon here's the bull, here's the ram. This is the intersection of Taurus and Aries, but it also happens to be the equinox, the equinoctial point,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a sidereal zodiac, not a tropical one.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the 1500 BC, the equinox is not at 0 Aries, it's at 0 Taurus,
Mm-hmm.
right here. The solstice is not at 0 Cancer, as is in tropical, it's at 0 Leo.
Mm-hmm.
And then the eastern equinox, which would be, it's at the intersection of Libra and Scorpio. It's at 0 of Scorpio. So that the whole sky, in terms of the tropical zodiac, has shifted back a whole sign.
Mm-hmm.
And what's significant then, so we're just looking at the sky here. The Virgin is opposite the Twins across this axis. The Virgin, so that the dual, what we call the dual signs,
Mm-hmm.
form a square if we were to go this way.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the what we call the fixed signs, we would say as Hellenistics, Leo cannot aspect Cancer, but if we look at Scorpio, which is here,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to look across, it's going to be right across from Aries, the ram.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, we're taking the idea of Antisha and contra Antisha,
Mm-hmm.
but here we're getting the Rasi aspects.
Yes.
The Virgin is across from the Twins, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Twins are going to be, I guess, down here across from Pisces. The Virgin is going to be opposite Sagittarius, and they'll form a square. Libra is going to be across from the Bull.
Yes.
Scorpio is going to be across from the Ram. So we see the Rasi aspects between signs just by looking at the sky. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely.
So if we're observational astrologers, we're not thinking theoretically, we're just looking up at the heavens and saying, what is across from others? We get the Rasi aspects.
Just from observation.
Just from observation.
Just from observation.
Just from observation.
At that time, these constellations were named differently, or?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, so, but that was like 1500 BC.
I don't know when the constellation.
So this was purely observational, so this doesn't have anything to do with the tropical or the sidereal zodiac.
Right, it's just what stars are opposite what stars in the sky. Here's the horizon, the green line. Here's the equator, the blue line. Here's the ecliptic, the orange line. By definition, where the ecliptic crosses the equator is the equinox, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I was looking when is Zero Leo at the midheaven? That's what I was looking for, and I came up with this date. I mean, it could be 100 years off or more, but it's roughly somewhere between Leo and Cancer. And this is where the universe was born. If we have these observations, even if we don't have the constellations named yet, we know where the stars were.
Sure.
And as we start to name things, we can start making a theory about, this is the raw data. And then based on the raw data, we start theorizing, how are they connected? And maybe 1,000 years later, we make the connections. But 1,000 years later, since we don't know yet about precession, we may still think that the sky looks like this when everything is shifted in terms of the tropical zodiac. Moving on, so this is from Ernst's book. This is his diagram of the Rasi aspects. Oh yeah, here he connects the directions. I think this is from Brihat Shastra. He says, this is Ernst's explanation based on the literature, that east is opposite west, south is opposite north, to the side of east is north, the side of other side is south, southeast is opposite northwest. These are the dual signs.
Yes.
And so this is his transit. East, for east, right, Aries, Taurus, then Cancer, Leo. At north, Libra, Scorpio, and Capricorn, Aquarius at south. So he has Libra, Scorpio at west, Aries, Taurus at east. And if we go back here, we have Libra, Scorpio at east. We're looking from the earth out. He was looking at the sky in. So he reversed the directions. Libra, Scorpio at the eastern horizon, Aries, Taurus at the western horizon. So this picture is really consistent with the Vedic literature on why the Rasi aspects are the way they are. Okay, optics. So this is important. In the 5th century, Empedocles wrote that the goddess Aphrodite is responsible for vision, because when she created the human eye, she put a light source in the eye, so that when you look at something, the light in your eye beams out in a straight line, hits whatever you're looking at, and maybe bounces back so you can see it.
Yes.
And the ancient astrologers equated the planets to human eyes. The reason the planets could be seen or influence us is that they would beam out their rays in straight lines. And they could see each other when their rays connected. And that these rays emerging from the eyes or from planets traveled in straight lines. And in fact, the word aspect in Latin comes from aspicere, to look at. So I look at, or I aspect you by beaming out rays from my eyes at you in a straight line. They hit you, they illuminate you, and I can see you. That's the optical theory.
In Vedic astrology is drishti.
But you can only gaze by sending out beams of light from your eyes. And the planets, by analogy, can only see each other by sending out their rays to another planet in straight lines. But the planets like the human eye, have blind spots. Right? This is peripheral vision. So the human eye can look straight ahead. It can only see maybe up to 100 degrees to the left and 100 degrees to the right. And the rest of this is sort of a blind area. So it can see what's directly in front of it and maybe 90 to 100 degrees to the right and to the left.
Mm-hmm.
And if I put here an isosceles triangle, so that in terms of Rashi aspects, straight ahead would be what you're looking at, and then what's to your side would be 90 degrees this way or 90 degrees this way. Those would be the two sides. And to illustrate this here's the Thema Mundi. I moved 0 Leo to the ascendant here. And so this sign, if it's looking across parallel to the horizon here, kind of like an anticial viewing, not an aspect, it's going to see Capricorn, and it's going to see what's 90 degrees to the left and to the right of Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, in music theory, Aries and Libra are the same note as Capricorn, but they're just an octave apart. Right. So they have almost exactly similar properties. Here I put the eye in. So here is Leo. Well, here I have Leo looking. This is a regular aspect, not a Rashi aspect.
Mm-hmm.
If it's looking across at Aquarius, these are in the blind spot. You can't see what's behind your head or behind your ears. Mm-hmm. So this sign and this sign are behind the ears. The sign itself is what's behind your head. Your eyeballs are in front. So a sign cannot aspect itself because it can't see itself. It can't aspect what's immediately left or right of it because those are in its blind spot, just as the human eye can't see what's behind the two ears.
Mm-hmm.
But it can see the rest of the circle. Okay. So this is the Hellenistic optical theory, which I think fits right in with the Rashi aspect theory as well.
Yes. I'm just thinking that if you look at Antisya, so there, if you look at the purely astronomical phenomena of light and light across from the axis, from the solstitial axis, like Capricorn and Sagittarius. I mean, I'm not sure if that's clearly a connection, right? That's clearly, for lack of a better word,
it's a non-aspectual connection, yeah.
Yeah, but let's say that it's it's, you know what I mean, it's a connection. Yeah. So right. It's not a Ptolemaic aspect, but it's a clear connection. So that's what makes me doubt the vision rationale, because it is the fact that the sun, I mean, in Vedic astrology, the Rashi means a bundle of light. So it is the path of the sun that creates the Rashis, the signs, right? 1 degree per day and so on, idealized. But then we have these two signs across from each other, from the solstitial axis in Antisya and contra Antisya along the nuptial axis. And they do have a strong affiliation, a strong connection, literally in the amount of daylight that is actually passing. So that is my remark, I would say.
That's a good point. So Antisya and Rashi aspects, according to the optical theory, signs see what's directly opposite them across the wheel. But the Antisya is an alternate way of beholding another sign. Instead of looking directly across the wheel, looking at the reflection across one of these axes. So it's not direct seeing, it's more like indirect seeing, like more like looking in a mirror than looking straight at something. And so here, if we make 0 Leo to 0 Aquarius, this axis, and 0 Taurus to 0 Scorpio, this axis, as if they were the solstitial and equinoctial axes of the 3rd millennium BC, when they were those axes in the sky. Then these signs reflect these signs, right? The dual signs reflect each other. The fixed signs reflect the cardinal or active signs. And the same with in this direction.
Yes.
So we have kind of the Rasi aspect relationships, and the adjacent signs can never see each other. So we don't allow that.
So if you look at the Scorpio, let's say Leo aspecting Capricorn, okay?
Right.
And then,
well, it's looking at its reflection over there, basically. It's not looking directly, it's looking like in a mirror, and it's
looking along the solstitial axis.
Exactly.
Right? Across the equinoctial axis.
And there's a direct aspect, Leo would look straight out and would see Aquarius.
Sure. No, but in terms, let's say, let's speculate in terms of Rashi aspects, right?
Yeah, but if Leo were looking...
Because this is what a Rashi aspect does. It is Leo that is Rashi aspecting Capricorn.
But this is more like looking in a mirror, where the mirror is this...
But you know, it is a Rashi aspect. That's what I'm saying. This is how Rashi aspects are currently used.
Leo's going to look, it'll see the image in the mirror is going to be Capricorn, and at the sides, it's going to see the other 2 cardinal signs. They're the signs that are most resonant with Capricorn. They're an octave apart in the musical theory.
Yes.
Now, next slide. This I thought was interesting. If we say the universe is born or conceived at the meeting of these 2 signs, then the dual signs sort of form a kind of barrier that protects the newly conceived universe. And if this is the universe, the path the universe will follow until its ending or destruction, we have Mercury and Jupiter forming the sort of boundaries that protect this new conception. And this is the second strength of Rashi, right?
Yes.
And it also these are the directional strengths of Jupiter and Mercury right here. So I thought that was an interest. I don't know if there's any way connected, but I thought it was interesting. We certainly have Jupiter and Mercury outlining, protecting this region where the universe comes into existence. Why just put the Rashi aspects of Mercury, Jupiter signs in here?
Yes.
And so here in this diagram, Cancer can't aspect Leo, they're adjacent, but Cancer can look across and see Aquarius. And because Aquarius resonates with Taurus and Scorpio, it gets a glimpse of those 2. To sort of sum up my speculation here, Rashi aspects are reflections across the solstitial and equinoctial axes of 1500 BC, 0 Leo, 0 Taurus, as they appeared in the sky in the 2nd millennium BC. Adjacent signs cannot see each other. Looking at a sign across the solstitial equinoctial axis enables the observer to see or behold the 2 related signs at its sides, one defined as the 2 sides of a similar modality connected by an isosceles triangle, whose base is the diameter of the zodiac circle. That's this diagram. In other words, if I look here to Aquarius, this blue triangle shows me what else I can see. And if I look here to Capricorn, the red triangle, here's the sign, and these are the signs at its sides. This is from, I think, Ernst again. Here's an isosceles triangle. The base is the diameter of the circle, right? It's a 180-degree line that connects. It's the diameter of the zodiac circle. And the 2 signs that are at the sides of Aquarius are on this, the sides of the triangle are the same. The base of the triangle is the diameter of the circle. Okay. So if you just move this diameter around, it'll give you all the signs that are connected. This was an interesting, let me see if I can get it up. It'll take a minute. Here we go. So what this is I happened to see this on the internet recently. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
We measure an angle inside a circle. This line is the sine of the angle formed. This line is the cosine of the angle formed, and this line is the tangent of the angle formed. Mm-hmm. And if you set it in motion, you can see that it sort of is like the regular aspects along the tangent and the Rashi aspects, or the adtisha and contradtisha along the sine and cosine. Isn't that interesting? So that I think these ancient astrologers are playing also with trigonometry and triangles and how they relate within a circle. Mm-hmm. And that's my speculation. But it seemed to me in looking at this that there must have been a cross-cultivation of ideas across cultures. Yes. And that the astrologers in Greece and Egypt must have been somehow communicating with the astrologers in India. And there must have been some kind of sharing of ideas where they developed them a little differently in the two systems, but the basic empirical data and observations were probably the same.
But what I always wondered is that Jaimini seems so far out, even if you look at what the Hellenistic astrology has to say. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that it's much older than between 300 and 600 BC is what I wonder, right?
It could be, yeah.
Because the book is so different from all the other stuff that I came about in astrology.
I really know very little about Jaimini.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. It can be so amazingly concrete. I think the most practical, concrete explanations of the Rashis of the signs are found in Jaimini's Padesa Sutras. Mm-hmm. I constantly see it popping up, these signs and what they represent on a concrete level. He mentions a Rashi, then you have to manipulate it, and it becomes a number. You have to divide it by 12, and that's then, the number that results in the Rashi that he's actually talking about. So
But see, that might argue more for it was an observational system of the sky, and what we now call the signs were really just ways of measuring what you're looking at, orienting yourself in the sky.
Anthony, thank you very much for this elucidation.
Well, whatever. Speculation.
Speculation.
It may be just a bunch of nonsense.